If you look at the world powers in 1800 compared to the world powers in 1900, two countries that'll greatly stand out as being introduced to the world powers will be Germany and Japan. Germany did not exist in 1800, and Japan was still a backwards feudal state. Yet, in these 100 years, both countries will rise to become world powers and greatly influence the events of the 1900s. Before 1871, the Holy Roman Empire is the closest thing to a German state. What is today Germany was divided into multiple kingdoms, principalities, duchies. After 1815 and after Napoleon's rise, German-speaking lands were loosely organized into the German Confederation, which was dominated by Prussia and Austria. Austria was an old multi-ethnic empire ruled by a German aristocracy. Prussia was a majority German rising power with a highly capable professional army. Both held lands inside of and outside of the German Confederation. Otto von Bismarck was the Prussian prime minister. He assumed leadership in 1862, and he declared that he would rule through blood and iron. He was very open about wanting to unite all the German provinces into one German empire led by a Prussian king. Bismarck began to use a strategy of realpolitik when he sparked 3 wars with neighboring states. Prussia easily defeated its enemies, first Denmark, then Austria. With each victory, more German states joined Prussia. Bismarck's masterpiece, though, was to provoke the Franco-Prussian War, where Prussia led a united German force to invade France and capture Paris. In January of 1871, inside of the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia became Kaiser Wilhelm, or the Emperor of Germany. So in the lead up to the Franco-Prussian War, much of Germany was united. Then, whenever the Franco-Prussian War was ignited, the southern German states joined Prussia in order to invade France. Then Alsace-Lorraine was added as a spoil of war. The German Empire was declared inside of the Palace of Versailles, adding insult to injury for France. On paper, the Franco-Prussian War might seem like a minor war, but the implications of this war will be long-lasting and directly affect behavior of the European powers during the Great War. The Franco-Prussian War happened around the same time as the American Civil War. The difference is the American Civil War drug on for 5 years and became a war of attrition, where huge percentages of the entire United States died in a prelude to modern warfare. Instead, the Franco-Prussian War was a relatively quick war that only took a couple of months and saw minimal casualties in comparison to the American Civil War. European countries would have a fallacy that modern warfare would be very quick, with decisive blows taken, and they believed wars would last several months at most. These misconceptions will root their ugly head during the Great War. Before unification, Prussia studied British industrialization. Textile factories, ironworks, and coal mines spread across German lands in the 1850s. In 1871, when Germany unified, it was one of the most industrialized countries in the world. And just before World War I, Germany actually surpassed Britain in industrial output and was second only to the United States. So one important concept that has to be understood to understand this time period is the wave of nationalism. So nationalism was a belief that everybody who lived inside of a country needed to have the same language, culture, religion. Essentially, everybody within one country had to be the same people. For example, in the United States and in Britain, there was a push for everybody to speak English and to have the same Protestant religious background. Nationalism was radically different from the old monarchical belief where you lived under the rule of a king and were a subject. With nationalism, people felt like every citizen should all be part of the cultural nation state within their country. Nationalism was a unifying force for other countries such as Italy, which in a similar process all united under one crown. The king of Piedmont Sardinia became the king of Italy. However, nationalism could be a dividing factor in multi-ethnic states, such as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had multiple ethnic groups ruled by a German minority. Or another example would be the Russian Empire, which literally had triple-digit ethnic groups within its border. We will return to the theme of nationalism throughout this unit. It's a very important concept to understand. Not only was nationalism a driving force in Europe, it became a worldwide phenomenon. Now we're going to look at nationalism and its effects on Japan. In 1800, Japan is still a feudal society ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate. 1853, the U.S. Navy demands trading and docking privileges in Japan. The shogun accepted the Treaty of Kanagawa, opening Japan. 1864, British and French ships shell the southwestern coast of Japan in retribution for Japan's treatment of their nationals. Japan was faced with the possibility of becoming a victim of imperialism. China had been defeated in the Opium Wars, and China was now a hollow shell of itself dominated by European powers. Japan wanted to avoid this. 1868, the shogun is overthrown and the Meiji government is formed. The Meiji instituted reforms to make Japan a modern nation state. Public education as well as research universities were established. Japan rapidly industrialized with state-owned factories. Japan created a modern conscript army fashioned after Prussia, a modern navy fashioned after Britain, and a government bureaucracy fashioned after the German Empire. 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. By this time, Japan had emerged as an industrial imperial power. One key component of the Meiji Restoration and the attempt to compete with Europe by becoming an industrialized nation state for Japan to create its own empire. This started with the conquest of Korea. Before the First World War, Japan had a regional empire that stretched from Taiwan all the way into territory that was taken from Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. The peak of the Empire of Japan will come during World War II, when they control a stunning 1/6 of the entire Earth's surface. The rise of Japan to an industrial power in the span of less than 50 years, to me, is still one of the most amazing stories in world history. In the next section, we will look at how the domination of most of the world, Africa and Asia, by European powers affected the world that we live in today. It's impossible to tell that story, though, without considering the rapid rise of countries like Japan and Germany, all fueled by nationalism. And particularly, I find the unification of Germany to be particularly impactful. If you just want one quick anecdotal reason this is so impactful, consider this. The eternal rivals of Britain and France will soon unify together to fight the rising power of Germany in the Great War. For better or for worse, the German Empire and its successor states will spark the events of the early 1900s.
Alle Straßen enden, hört unser Weg nicht auf. Wohin wir uns auch wenden, die Zeit im leeren Lauf. Das Herz verbrannt, im Schmerz verbannt, so ziehen wir verloren durch das graue Niemandsland. Vielleicht kehrt von uns keiner mehr zurück ins Heimatland.